All right, so it's Wednesday, second to last day of official instruction. Tonight we're going to go to React Chicago. It's only a couple blocks away from here. It'll be from 6 to 8 p.m. There's going to be food usually. Last time I went, they just had like some Costco snacks and rolls and stuff at the very beginning, and then pizza came throughout the night, and it was some good beer. And they bought a sheet cake, like those big A, like Costco sheet cakes that feed like 100 people. So that was kind of fun. And then there was, I think there's 2 talks going on this evening. If you haven't already, and you're here in person, make sure that you do sign up for this. Otherwise, we won't be able to get past security. Do it now if you have not done it. I don't think the RSVPs have closed yet, and they basically let everyone through because there's 114 people signed up. Probably 60 or 70 of them are going to show up. So just make sure that you're signed up here so that we can all get in. Tomorrow, there's someone observing me at 9 a.m. But tomorrow we'll go over basically anything you have questions on, and we're going to do our final Beyond Tech, which is how to look for jobs after Code Platoon's finished. We'll have our final project pitches at 2 p.m. tomorrow, so that we'll vote on them, and then I think there's going to just be one group, which is everyone here in person plus Jackie. And then on Friday, all of your assessments are going to be due if you haven't passed everything yet, which I think everyone has. Josh, am I mistaken? I think everyone's passed.
Everyone is passed.
I think everyone's passed. And your resumes are going to be due on Friday as well. Make sure you upload those so we just have them. Fewer things for you to keep track of. Can you let Mark know not to come in this Saturday? Thank you. Any questions on anything? On Friday, 10:30, we're going to be at A-Flight. We'll be there all day. We'll be there all day next week. But try to get, let's say, actually, let me open this back up. Let's say arrive at, let's say we'll start class at 10 a.m. just to clear out all of our crap. So let's throw that in here. 10 a.m. Start. And then, so that should be good. Okay, so we're going to talk about.
Where do we access it?
You should have access to it, but we'll do that a little bit later. If you don't have access to it, we'll show you later. Okay, so we're going to talk about Redux today, and this is a new kind of storage system. So we've been talking a lot about MVC recently. What does MVC stand for? All right, so explain to me how that works in terms of like a website. Like I'm on a website, I click a button, and then it does something. Walk me through that process.
So everything is controlled by the controller.
Mm-hmm.
The controller looks at view. It gives you the view and the model, because the model is what talks to the data.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say if you click on I don't know, like a table,
Mm-hmm.
that table populates, so the controller figure out what it needs to show you,
Mm-hmm.
Based on what view you have it set to, and then the data that's populated is from the model.
Yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much right. So I'm on a website. Let's say I'm on Amazon. I see that yellow button in the top right corner. It says place an order. I press that button. First thing that happens, generally speaking, is it will hit a controller. The controller basically says, like, this is like, you've placed this thing. I'm kind of like, I am the entry point into this entire app of like all this different database calls. Your controller links up many different models. It could be like, I'm going to place an order. I'm going to charge a credit card. Like I have to find and insert new data into the database. And the only way to insert for using model view controller is using that model layer. From there, once I talk to the database and get a bunch of stuff back, at that point, I will populate a particular view. So it says like, thank you for placing order number whatever. These are the items that you purchased. So, you know, using that example, we have to keep track of, we have to create an order, we have to keep track of different items, the quantity of items and total. So we're making all these different database calls. On a scale like most things that we're writing, MVC works 100% of the time. So if you think about a lot of startups in the 2012, 2010 era, they all use Ruby on Rails. Most of them use Ruby on Rails because that's all that people needed. The web was just starting to really become a thing. And what would happen is like Ruby on Rails and other MVC frameworks, you can get stuff off the ground really, really fast. As things grow, it becomes more and more difficult to do that. So think about a scale like Facebook. There's a bug that still may be around, but they used MVC because that was what was available when Messenger first came out, the Facebook chatting app. But how many times have you gone to Facebook, you see a little notification that someone messaged you, you click on it and nobody messaged you. And then you refresh the page and it's still there. And that's because this is what it looked like for them. A user would take an action, it would hit a controller, and then it might need to update like 50 different models, and from there they might need to update 100 different views, like based on one particular action. The issue with that is like things can break. Things there might be edge cases you forget about, and like it was an ongoing problem when they decided they were using just MVC. So the issue was that the way that data was flowing through the application, like in a regular MVC app, which is just like a CRUD app, like I click, I hit the create button, it hits off a controller action, it hits off a model, it hits off a view. That's very simple, it's very, very straightforward. But when you talk about Facebook or things that are larger, one action can hit off 100 different views. And because things get so convoluted, things get a little broken. So they decided to go through, because they didn't want to use the MVC model anymore because it started to have its shortcomings, they moved to something called Flux. There was a person named Dan Abramoff. He's a Facebook engineer. I think he's, let's take a look. Dan Abramoff. Yeah, I believe he was, I think he is a Facebook engineer. And then so he's a Facebook engineer. He's got a lot of green over here, so a lot of people like to follow him. He's got 31,000 followers on GitHub. But he decided, I don't want to have this giant architecture anymore. I want to have something called unidirectional data flow using an architecture called Flux. So I'm going to do an action. The action is going to go off to a dispatcher, which is going to go to a general store, like a general database that's on the client. And then that was going to update the views. So his idea was like, I don't want to have 50 different things relying on each other. I just want to have one central location for every single step. I take an action, it gets dispatched to the store updates the view. And as a result, he created the Flux architecture, which later became Redux. So let's get started. There are three main principles of Redux that we really need to know. Let me just open. Okay. So before we've been dealing with state, and state was in one giant, like every single individual component had its own individual state. Instead of each individual component having its individual state, they decided to have something called Redux, which is one central location to store all of our data. You can think of it more or less as a client-sized database.
But anyway, usually it was like, I remember thinking about it,
So the main thing between Redux and non-Redux React apps is non-Redux React apps, you have to keep track of state in every single individual component. Redux has it all in one centralized store. So it's like, instead of thinking of this component is controlling this state, this component is controlling another state, it's my entire app has one giant like central state area, and then I'm just going to update that one state area. Every single component subscribes to it. So three major principles. One is state is managed in one giant immutable store. Think of it as a client-sized database. Your actions are going to trigger changes, and then the state is going to be changed by reducers. So with that, let's kind of get started. I've run create React app, and I created something called counter Redux. So I'm going to, or maybe Redux counter, sure. I'm going to open this up in Visual Studio Code, and we're going to just do a very, very basic thing. So just to kind of show how far we've come with with React, I want you to create a quick counter going up and going down using just regular React. All right, so what do I need to do? Let's say I'm going to run npm start here. While I'm waiting for that, I'm just going to call this counter game. I'm going to get rid of this section right over here. All right, so I've updated it. It's automatically refresh. I got that counter game. I want to keep track of then like basically the counter, and I want an increment and a decrement button. So first things first, what do I need to do? What do I need to have? I need a constructor because I need to keep track of state. So constructor, it's going to take in some props, super props, and then you said I have to have the constructor. So how do I set the state here?
This state is equal to curly brackets. We'll just say counter colon 0.
Okay. All right, and how do I interpolate that onto the screen?
Curly braces. This state. Yeah.
Just put it in a p tag for now. Let's just see if this works. Counter game with 0. I don't want to put it there. I want to put it underneath. Counter game, and then number is 0. Now I want 2 buttons to show up. One's to go up, and one is going to go down.
So we'll just do button.
Okay.
And then we'll just do a plus sign.
Plus, and I know I'm going to have one for minus as well, so I might as well do that now.
Cool.
Okay.
And then inside of the button, we want to do a one-click. I guess we'll do a function above it after that, but I guess we'll just name this function. We'll do a fat arrow. And then this dot add 1.
I'm just going to call it increment button. I'll just do handle increment. You can name it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it that. All right, so fat arrow, and then this dot underscore decrement. Handle decrement. All right. And what else?
We need to create those functions.
All right, so just to recap, we created a constructor, set the state on this particular component to set counter equal to 0. We're interpolating that on the screen. We created 2 buttons. When I click on it, it's going to fire off handle decrement and increment. So do handle decrement, it's going to do something. And same thing here, handle increment, it's going to do something. What is it going to do?
We want to increment the state or the state counter by 1. So this dot set state here. And then we want to do this dot state.
You don't need to.
Or
oh, you need to. What's the key that I'm trying to change?
Counter.
Okay, and then same thing here on the bottom. I actually put this in the wrong place. How does this look to everybody? Look pretty good?
Can you not do just setting it to this dot state that counter plus plus or minus minus?
No.
Is that gonna throw errors?
It's going to throw errors, yeah. Let's see if this works. All right, plus doesn't do anything. Minus also does not do anything. What are we missing?
Is it not updating?
It is not updating, but just in case, we will do a console log of this.state. All right, so currently the counter is 0. I need to make this bigger. I can't see anything. It's not making a difference. How do I make this 10? The plus and the minus are both not doing anything at this particular moment. Does this have something to do with this fat arrow down here? Are we not invoking?
You're not calling event into it.
I'm actually not invoking it at all.
Oh.
So that might be one thing. Let's find out if this makes a difference.
Yeah.
Yep, that was just that very small thing. I'm going to make a quick edit because we haven't seen this before and I found it to be pretty cool. I'm just going to do this dot handle decrement equals this dot handle decrement dot bind to this, and then same thing with the increment. Then down over here, I actually can just call it like this. And I don't even think I need to invoke it. Before I tell you what I just did, let me just verify that it works. All right, cool. So I found this out yesterday. It's a fairly cool thing. By putting So inside your constructor, you can do a bunch of things to get your component ready. We usually just set a state inside the constructor, but you can also say every time somebody calls this .handle decrement, what I really mean is I'm going to bind this to it so that I don't have to call it down here. I could just call this .handle increment, and we know based off of the constructor, it actually means you want to bind the concept of this. And since it's within constructor, and constructor is native to this app component, I'm always going to be bound to the correct component. So it's just a small little shorthand. They both work. I could have also done that. We could have done Michael's way. There's 3 different ways we could call this. I'm going to go with this one just because it matches up with your curriculum fairly well. So this is very easy. I'm going to add a few little lines of CSS just to make it look a little bit nicer. Right here down at the bottom. And one last thing. Just see. Okay, so it makes it look a little bit nicer, plus and minus. This was very easy, right? We just finished that, think about a week ago, we didn't know how to do anything with React, and now we can finish a up and down counter game using React in 5 minutes. That's pretty cool. But we want to, again, we said we want to get all of the state management out of each individual component and into a central Redux store. So first things first, we're going to kill the server, and we're just going to run npm install -- I can spell -- save - dev redux. So this is going to call out to npm, save it inside of this particular environment as a package called Redux. Inside of your package.json, remember that's the same thing as gem file. I have all the dependencies right over here. So it's making a call out to npm right now, and you'll see that once it's finished installing, it's going to add Redux as an extra dependency.
What does dev refer to?
Sorry?
Dev?
It's saving Redux as a dev dependency rather than a production dependency, so that whenever people are running it and trying to do development on it, it's saved in dev instead of in production. It's kind of like when we were doing things inside of Gemfile, it had group development and test. Those are only going to execute in development and inside of test. So there's that. You have dependencies over here, and you have those dev dependencies down here at the bottom, saving Redux inside of there. So the way that we set this up is under source, where I'm going to create a file called store.js. I'm also going to include a folder called modules. And inside of modules, I'm going to have a file called counter.module.js. There's going to be a few different ways that if you Google online, like how do people organize it, how do people organize all of their Redux code, and we're using something called Dux. Like this, Dux is the way that we're going to set this one up. So to get all of our ducks in a row, we're going to create 4 things: action types, action creators, reducers, and the initial state. So inside of counter.module.js, we're going to start off with action types. And what this is what actions can people take. So related to the counter, what actions can people take? They can go up and go down. That's all they can do. So I'm going to create that up here. I'm just going to create a constant called increment counter equals increment counter, and then const decrement counter equals decrement counter. By having it as a constant, you know that every single time that I reference this particular thing, it actually means I'm going to run, like this is the action that someone can take. They can either increment the counter or they can decrement the counter. Next, we have what are called action creators. This is like these are functions that take information and return objects. So it's fairly simple. Const increment counter type is going to be counter, and then same thing with decrement counter. So just to review, we're using the Dux way of setting up all of our data flow. We created a file called store, which we'll touch in just a second, and we have modules. We have all of our Redux stuff relating to the counter, and again, if we had 4 or 5 different things that we want to handle, it would be in 4 or 5 different files. But right now, we just care about the counter. We have action types. These are the things that people can do, and we just declare them as constants at the very top so that we don't mistype or we don't mistype anywhere else. It's just all the action types that people can take go at the very top. Then we've got action creators. These are functions that we're going to be using to basically tell the reducer what to do. We're going to have an initial state. So the initial state for all of our counters is going to have the counter starting at 0. And then we have our reducer. The reducer is the action taker, like what's actually going to make things work. So our reducer looks a little something like this. So the reducer takes in the previous state. When we first start, it's going to be the initial state, and then a particular action. When the action is going to be increment counter, I'm going to get the new state, which is a copy of the previous state, and change that to the counter from what it was to the previous state plus 1. If I were to do the same thing down over here with the decrement counter, it'd be previous counter minus 1. So this is probably pretty foreign to everyone, starting from the top. Inside of counter.module.js, this is the 4 things that we need to set up our Redux store. One is what particular actions can people take? We declare them as constants at the very top so that we don't mistype multiple places. It's just I list all the actions that someone can take, set the constant equal to the string version of it. The action creator sometimes takes a payload, but for us right now, we're just passing in the type because we're going to be using it down over, we're going to be doing this in another file. Then we have an initial state. We set counter equal to 0, and we got the reducer, which is what actually happens. So I've got a const called reducer. I'm going to need to export that, sorry. Export default reducer. it takes in two arguments, the previous state, and if I don't pass it a previous state, it's going to take the initial state right over here, and then the action, and that's what I'm going to be calling a little bit later. I'm going to do reducer dot decrement counter, reducer dot increment counter. When I'm incrementing, it's going to take the old state, set it as new state with the spread operator. Remember, the 3 dots is like a spread operator. I take a knife, put it inside a jar of peanut butter, spread it all over a piece of bread. I'm going to set that to the previous counters and then add 1 to it. Same thing with the decrement counter here at the bottom. Inside of the store, it's a fairly simple, simple file. I'm going to import the create store library from the Redux that we installed earlier. We import the reducer from this counter module. So this entire from lines 13 to 26. And we're going to create a store from that. Finally, we're going to, before we hook everything up, let's just make sure we can get access to this particular store from our app component. So I'm going to import store from, where am I? So I'm here in app.js. It's in the same area, so I'm going to do .stat store.js. In the constructor of our object, of this particular component, we hard code this .state to equal 0. Instead of doing like hard coding it like this, I'm just going to do this .state to be store.getState. And we're still going to console log this .state out there just to make sure that we're actually reading from the initial state found inside the counter module. Changed a few things. This should refresh. I should probably turn on my server. Something's broken. React scripts command not found. Did I break something? npm install, start. Are there any questions on anything so far? Or is it one of those things you just need to jump into and try? Michael?
What is the concept of the store? You were saying earlier that it was in the client. Does that mean that like the database is on the client side?
So there's servers and clients, right? Client, it's like if I'm talking to you, I'm the client, you're the server. If you're talking to me, you're the client, I'm the server. So the client is the one making the request. So most of the time when you talk about client, you're talking about Google Chrome. When you talk about server, you're talking about Amazon's, server, or GitHub server or something along those lines. Instead of storing, so we were saying that when we used to do things, every single React component held its own. Every single React component held its own state, right? And instead of having each individual component hold its own state, we're going to have one central area for all of the components to like put stuff into and get stuff from. So it's kind of like a client-side database. So meaning that it's not saved on the server, but all the actions that you take and all the things that you do are all saved on your particular machine, and that your machine keeps track of all the different things that are happening. It only makes database calls when it needs to. I messed something up. All right, so something's broken over here. Store. All right. So before we had this dot state equal to our own individual state. We had it looked a little something like this. And that's when this particular app component was handling its own individual state. But at this point, we are setting our state equal to the store's state. Remember, that store is that client-side database. So we're setting it for every single component. We created another component and we set the state equal to that store. They're sharing a state at that particular point. So it's not each individual one taking care of itself. You can kind of see that I have a console log of the state, and it looks like this counter 0. Just to verify that we are subscribed to the store correctly, I'm going to go inside of here. It's going to export default to store. I need to go inside the reducer, which is from this module. This particular reducer has a state, which comes from initial state. I'm just going to change this to. When I refresh the page over here, you can see it's going to console log the counter is equal to poop. So I am subscribed to the Redux store and not each individual app component's state. Change this back to 0 for now. All right. So currently, if you take a look over here, I can still increment and decrement the everything as expected, because the buttons are changing component level state instead of the Redux stores level state. We can change that. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep our handle increment, where is it? Handle increment and handle decrement. You can kind of see I'm directly changing it here on this particular component. But instead I want to update the store, this entire, this particular state that's being shared between different components. So it's going to look a little something like this. Handle increment is going to have the store dispatch the increment counter function. So again, the store goes to this particular file. The store is equal to create store, which is a library from Redux, into the reducer, which is lines 16 through 23 here. I pass in the state and the action. The action, in my case, that I'm telling it to execute is increment counter. Increment counter comes up to here. It fires off. It says, in the case where it is increment counter, I'm going to increase it +1, and when it's decrement, I'm going to decrease it +1. Similarly, when I copy and paste here, when I handle the decrement, I'm actually just going to do decrement counter. Because these two things don't exist on my file quite yet, you can kind of see increment counter is not defined. So I'm going to do import increment counter and decrement counter. From modules counter. All right. So let's see if this works. Increment counter is not defined. That is the same. That is the same. All right. Let's see if this works. And nothing's working. So the issue of what's happening at this point is when we first create app.js and it first mounts onto the screen, we set the initial state to stores.getState. When we handle increment and handle decrement, it's actually updating the store itself, which is updating the client-side Redux database. But the issue is we're not subscribed to all the changes. So we set it once and then we never set it again. So we need to actually subscribe to it. I'm just going to add these two methods inside of here. So when the component first mounts, we're going to subscribe to the store. We also have the ability to unsubscribe whenever it unmounts. So again, when the component first loads onto the screen and mounts onto the screen, I can subscribe to the store so that every single change that happens, I can go up and go down, and I'm subscribed to it. When it unmounts, or when you decide to move on to a different component, I have the ability to unsubscribe as well, and that's a return value that's given to us for free. We can use that at a later point. So let's take a look. Let's see if this works. Refresh the page. We can go up. We can go down. So you might be thinking that's a lot of extra work for the same simple counter that I've used. I could set this up at 5 minutes, or I can take 45 minutes trying to figure out how Redux and React works. And that's not incorrect. The initial setup of Redux is really laborious, but if you're it's kind of like those things where you got to figure out what works for you. If you're just doing a simple counter game with one component, just put it on the component. No one cares. That's totally okay. When you have 50 different components and each individual component has its own state, you probably, and those states need to talk to one another. You kind of saw it with NewsSite. It was app.js needs to be updated when this thing 4 levels deep needs to updates as well. So you either chase that up a whole bunch of levels, which is okay if you want to do that, or you can have one central place so that they're all in the same playing field. When you update one thing, another thing is subscribed to the store and it updates. I'm going to do one last thing. We're going to just create a reset button. So using the same, we're just going to do more or less pattern recognition to try to do all of it. First things first, I'm going to just create a button called handle reset, I suppose. Let's do that. Maybe I'll create another method called handle reset. And I'll have store.dispatch reset counter. Again, I'm just doing pattern recognition, just more or less copying. So I created an extra button, created a function called handle reset. I'm just doing store.dispatch.reset counter instead of increment or decrement. Because I called it in this particular way down over here. Also going to handle it the same way up here. So handle reset. And I believe we're done. Actually, no, we need to import a reset counter. From here, we go into the store. Store is okay. We go inside the counter module, and we're just going to need to add a few things. So we're going to have another action that the person can take is that they can reset the counter. Set counter. We need to create an action creator. We're going to call this reset counter. The type is going to be reset counter. And then we just add one extra case statement down here at the bottom. In the case that somebody decides that they want to reset the counter, I'm going to just set the counter equal to 0. And I think that works for a reset button. Let's find out. I should probably change the wording on this one to not be minus, but reset. So I've got my counter, small little counter game. Goes up, goes down, reset back to 0. Goes up, goes down, resets back to 0. Any questions on the concept of Redux? This took me like 2 hours to try to figure out. So it is a fairly challenging. It is a fairly large jump between React and Redux. You don't have to use Redux on your final project if you don't want to. Each individual component can take care of its own state. But once you get to the point where it's like, I have many different components and each one of them needs to, when one component updates, another states on another component needs to update, you might want to consider Redux at that particular point.
That was it though. That's all it takes in order to get Redux going.
Yes.
Using the store.
Yep.
And I see that it's like doing stuff with on dismount. Will unmount, component did mount.
This one?
Yeah, is that going to be?
Yeah. So this is basically saying that when the component mounts, I'm automatically subscribing to the store.
And then will unmount to unsubscribe. Is that for saving virtual memory? Or why does it need to unsubscribe on will unmount?
So it's kind of like there's no I don't have a good analogy for it right now, but essentially it's like if your component is no longer mounted onto the DOM, there's no need to subscribe anymore. It's just like if it's not on the screen, you don't need to do anything with it.
My last question, and it's not really like specifically related to Redux, but if you have a website that's using these counters, and let's say it's like a Facebook game where you want people to pay you like $5 and you give them like 500 coins, how do you prevent them from running JavaScript that just runs the like give me 500 coin script? If that's what those things are using.
They don't have access to your source code. I don't think I can even. I don't know how to.
So you can't just run the internal functions from that console.
I don't believe so. I mean, we can try it. Just say. I don't think you can, because this is just. I don't think this hooks directly into your app. I can't do like this state counter equals 5.
You can only change elements.
Yep.
Could you change an element to?
Yeah, you can. I can make this say whatever I want.
But can you change you can't change the on-click values or anything?
I don't believe so. I don't even think it's actually. I don't even actually think it's there. This is a HTML root app. Yeah, so there's you can kind of see like the button. There's no on-click here. It's just like this is what renders out afterwards. I can make this say whatever I want. I can say you suck. Right? Like I can make it say whatever I want, but then it also goes away right away when I refresh the page because that's not part of the actual code. Any other question? Conceptually, what is Redux?
It is an overall state looker after, for lack of better words.
Looker after?
It's putting the eggs in one basket.
Yep, it's putting all the eggs. So you have 50 individual eggs. Those eggs can keep track of their own individual state, or you can have one giant basket which keeps track of the state for all 50 eggs. That's all it is. It's just one giant client-side database that holds everything.